Bill Anderson could bring an audience to silence with nothing more than a whisper. While others shouted their way through country music, he leaned into gentleness and still became one of the most enduring voices the Grand Ole Opry has ever known. For over 6 decades he carried that stage, wrote songs that spanned 3 generations, and quietly earned his place among the greats. To the world, he was Whispering Bill, steady, timeless, untouchable. But behind the spotlight, the story was not so serene. 2 marriages ended in heartbreak. A devastating car accident nearly took him from the stage altogether. Critics once called him too soft for Nashville, leaving him on the edge of walking away. And in his later years, when the applause dimmed and friends passed on, he was left with a silence far heavier than the one he sang in. So what was the cost of carrying country music on his shoulders for more than 60 years? Why did he say he could silence a theater with a whisper, but not keep the warmth alive at his own dinner table? And at 87, why has Bill Anderson finally chosen to tell the truth about his heartbreaking journey? When Bill Anderson wrote City Lights in the summer of 1957, he was just a 20-year-old journalism student, standing on a rooftop in Atlanta with a notepad in his hand. What came to him that night wasn't just a melody, it was a turning point, the kind of song that pulls a young man out of one life and sets him firmly in another. Within a year, Ray Price recorded it. Within weeks, it reached number 1, and for 13 straight weeks it stayed there. A reign that confirmed the world was ready to listen to a voice that didn't roar but whispered. At just 21, Bill had become a songwriter in demand. His words carried across the country by a star 10 years his senior. The boy from Georgia who once dreamed of being a sports writer suddenly had Nashville at his door. Graduation came in 1959, but the ink of his degree barely dried before he made a choice that shocked those around him. He turned down the newsroom. He walked away from the safe career. Instead, he carried his guitar and his notebook straight into the heart of country music. It was a decision that would define him for the rest of his life, though it came with costs no one could yet imagine. Nashville was ruthless, but Bill arrived with something most of its hopefuls lacked, a style no one else could imitate. He didn't belt, he didn't bend notes until they broke. He leaned close to the microphone, delivered his lyrics like secrets, and forced people to lean in. Whispering Bill wasn't a gimmick, it was survival. In 1961, the Grand Ole Opry welcomed him as its 61st member. That circle on the wooden stage became his anchor, the one place where the whisper could always be heard. He was still just in his 20s, yet already had a permanent home in the most sacred hall of country music. With that membership came expectation, and Bill met it head-on. Po folks spoke of childhood poverty without shame, a reminder that struggle didn't erase dignity. Mama Sang a Song was a hymn disguised as a memory, tender and unpolished, but powerful enough to leave audiences weeping. And then came Still, a ballad stripped bare, a heartbreak confession that sounded like it was sung to one listener alone. Still didn't just top the country charts. It crossed into the Billboard Hot 100, climbing into the top 10, a rare feat for a country artist in 1963. For Bill Anderson, it was validation. The world was listening. His whisper had become louder than most men's shouts. Yet success is never simple. That same song that won him fame also became a shadow. Crowds expected him to be gentle, always tender, never forceful. He was placed inside a box, his artistry mistaken for limitation. For a while he accepted it, letting the nickname Whispering Bill carry him through sold-out shows and charting singles. But beneath the applause, he already knew a truth that would haunt his career. Success in Nashville was fragile, and one whisper too many could turn into silence. That's why, in these early years, Bill began to build something beyond himself. He wrote not only for his own voice, but for others. It was a way of outlasting trends, of ensuring that even if his stage faded, his words would remain. And one of those songs, Once a Day, given to a young Connie Smith in 1964, made history, becoming the first debut single by a female country artist to stay at number 1 for 8 weeks. Bill wasn't just a singer anymore. He was the pen behind other stars' voices, a quiet force shaping Nashville's future. Yet with every success came an unspoken question. Could this soft-spoken Georgia boy survive in an industry where volume and bravado often won the day? Nashville was shifting, restless, chasing new sounds and louder icons. Bill Anderson was climbing fast, but he knew the higher he went, the further he could fall. Bill Anderson's greatest gift was not only his voice but his pen. Where some artist relied on image or on a single era's success, Bill mastered the art of staying timeless by writing songs that outlived decades. His own hits had proven his power, yet what truly set him apart was how often his words became the lifeblood of other people's careers. In 1964, he handed Once a Day to a young Connie Smith. The song didn't just launch her career, it shattered records. For 8 straight weeks, it sat at number 1. The longest any debut single by a female country artist has ever held that spot. Smith herself admitted the song defined her, but behind her voice was Bill's story, Bill's melody, Bill's touch. He had given her history, and in doing so, secured his own. That was only the beginning. Over the years, his songs found their way to the most powerful voices in country. George Strait's Give It Away swept the CMA Song of the Year award in 2007. Reminding the world that Bill's pen hadn't dulled with age. 3 years earlier, Brad Paisley and Alison Krauss had taken Whiskey Lullaby, a song co-written by Bill, and turned it into one of the most devastating love ballads of its generation. Young fans who had never heard Po' Folks or Mama Sang a Song suddenly knew Bill Anderson through their idols. It was proof that his influence stretched across generations, that his whispers could echo even in a louder, modern Nashville. Anderson didn't stop with music. He carved out space on television, first in soap operas and game shows during the 1960s and 70s, later as host and creator of Country's Family Reunion. That series wasn't flashy. There were no lights, no spectacle, just a circle of musicians sharing songs and stories. Yet it became beloved, a treasure chest of living history. Bill knew that one day the great voices of his time would fade, and he wanted their laughter, their memories, their truths captured forever. Fans saw it as entertainment. His peers knew it was preservation. By the mid-70s, the industry itself recognized his genius. The Nashville Songwriters Hall of Fame inducted him in 1975, early enough to show how deeply his words were already shaping the genre. 20 years later, the broader Songwriters Hall of Fame honored him as one of America's greatest lyricists, not just in country but in music as a whole. And in 2001, he entered the Country Music Hall of Fame, joining legends like Hank Williams and Loretta Lynn. It was the ultimate recognition that his whisper had written chapters of history that would never be erased. Yet for all the trophies, the titles, the television shows, there was a question that lingered every time Bill stepped off stage. Would the public still remember him if the songs stopped coming? Would they lean in for the whisper if younger, louder artists filled the airwaves? He carried that uncertainty quietly, turning it into drive. Bill once admitted in later years that he didn't write songs to chase awards. He wrote them to outlast his own time, to make sure his voice was present even when he wasn't. That drive made him relentless. Even as peers faded, even as trends shifted, Bill kept his pencil sharp. The words kept coming. And in those words was the answer to his doubt. As long as people felt heartbreak, as long as they searched for love, as long as they remembered their mothers and fathers and the small towns that raised them, Bill Anderson's songs would still matter. But as much as songwriting secured his legacy, it could not protect him from the storms waiting in his personal life. Off stage, the whisper became a silence filled with regret, broken promises, and the ache of love lost. And for Bill, those wounds would prove deeper than any criticism Nashville could throw his way. Success on stage didn't shelter Bill Anderson from failure at home. If anything, the more his career soared, the more fragile his personal life became. Fame offered applause, lights, and endless validation. But when the curtain dropped, he often returned to a house marked by distance rather than warmth. His first marriage came when he was still young, fresh from college, and beginning to make a name in Nashville. It brought him 3 children, and for a time, the stability he longed for. But the rhythm of country music, nights on the road, months away from home, the constant weight of expectation tore at the seams. What audiences saw as dedication to his craft, his family often experienced as absence. In later years, Bill admitted with painful clarity, he could hold a theater in silence with just a whisper, but he couldn't keep the conversation alive at his own dinner table. That marriage ended in divorce, leaving behind memories of a household that looked complete, but never truly was. In the 1970s, he tried again. A second marriage offered hope for healing, a chance to build something lasting away from the stage. Yet history repeated itself. Touring remained relentless, critics circled, and Bill found himself once more drifting from the very person he had promised to love. The divorce came like an echo of the first, cutting deeper because it confirmed a truth he couldn't ignore. The same passion that made him a legend also cost him his marriages. He would later confess that he loved music so much, he sometimes forgot how to love and take care of his family. That realization haunted him, a whisper of regret that never faded. Through it all, his children became his anchor. None of them chose music as a path, perhaps unwilling to chase the same dream that had stolen so much of their father's peace. But they stood by him. They didn't see him as the flawless Opry star, but as a man who tried, stumbled, and kept showing up. For Bill, they were a reminder that even in the wreckage of divorce, family could still bind him to something real. Yet loneliness remained his greatest enemy. In his later years, when the spotlight dimmed and friends passed on, he was often left in quiet rooms filled only with echoes of applause long gone. Some nights, he admitted, he opened old fan letters, just to feel connected again. The words of strangers, written decades earlier, reassured him that he mattered, that his music had reached hearts far beyond the silence surrounding him now. For a man who had spent a lifetime giving voice to others' pain, those letters became his own lifeline. And here lies the paradox of Bill Anderson's life. The whisper that made him immortal on stage left him unheard in the places that mattered most. He could move millions with a single song, yet in the spaces where love was supposed to thrive, his voice sometimes fell short. That contrast, triumph in public, sorrow in private, became the defining wound of his journey. But heartbreak alone doesn't define a man. For Bill, it was often the starting point for resilience. Each failed marriage, each lonely night, each letter pulled from a dusty box became fuel for new words, new songs, new stories that touched others who had felt the same. The question that lingered was whether he could survive the next storm, the one that wouldn't just test his heart but his very life. By the mid-1970s, the gentle voice that had once captivated millions suddenly found itself under fire. Country music was changing. Nashville was shifting away from sentimental ballads and polished storytelling, embracing a new wave of rebellion known as outlaw country. Willie Nelson, Waylon Jennings, and others brought grit, swagger, and defiance to the stage. In that climate, Bill Anderson's whisper was labeled by some as weakness. Critics dismissed him as too sweet, too soft, too polite for the times. Those words may not have left scars on a bolder man, but for Bill they cut deep. His music had always been born from sincerity, from telling stories that mattered. Now he faced a new question. Had his style, once celebrated, become irrelevant? In private moments he admitted he considered walking away from it all. The stage he had loved since 1961 suddenly felt like it was pushing him out. For a man who built his entire identity on connecting through words, the thought of silence was unbearable. But it wasn't only criticism that tested him. In the 1980s, while on tour, Bill's life nearly ended in an instant. A serious car accident left him with both legs in casts and months of immobility. For an artist accustomed to living on the road, the sudden stillness was brutal. He spent long days confined, facing not applause but silence, his body wrapped in pain. Yet it was in that silence that he turned back to what had always saved him: writing. Some of his most reflective songs came from those months of forced rest, words that carried not only sorrow, but the quiet resilience of a man learning again how fragile life could be. The accident changed him. It reminded him that every moment on stage was a gift, not a guarantee. And while he eventually returned to performing, there was a new layer in his songs, a deeper recognition of mortality. Fans could feel it. The whisper hadn't weakened. It had become more urgent. Still, the battle was ongoing. Even after recovery, Bill struggled with doubt, with whispers of irrelevance, with loneliness that grew sharper as the industry pushed forward. Yet he never surrendered. Instead, he found ways to adapt, writing for younger stars, stepping into television, mentoring peers. In an era when many of his contemporaries faded, Bill endured. But endurance came at a cost. Each triumph was shadowed by private pain, and each comeback demanded more of him than anyone in the audience could ever see. And that raises the question, How did a man battered by criticism, broken by accidents, and haunted by loneliness manage to keep standing for 6 decades? For most artists, a career is measured in bursts. A decade of relevance, a handful of hits, then fading into memory. Bill Anderson defied that pattern. At 87, he remains the longest-serving member of the Grand Ole Opry, a record no one else has touched. Every time he steps onto that wooden circle, audiences don't just hear a performance. They feel continuity, a living thread tying them back to Hank Williams, Patsy Cline, Loretta Lynn, and every voice that once stood in that same sacred space. Even in his later years, the pen never left his hand. Mornings still find him at a desk, a blank sheet of paper before him, a number 2 pencil in his grasp. That simplicity, pencil and page, has fueled him for decades. In 2024, long after most would have retired, he released the EP Forevermore, proof that the spark of songwriting hadn't dimmed. For Bill, music was never just a career. It was survival. It was therapy. It was a way of reminding himself and the world that he still had something to say. Of course, age brought new challenges. In August of 2025, a small accident at home forced him to pause his Opry appearances. For someone who had lived under stage lights for more than 60 years, even a short absence was painful. Yet Bill handled it as he always had, with humility. He apologized to fans, thanked them for their patience, and promised to return as soon as he was able. That honesty, that refusal to mask weakness, only deepened the affection people felt for him. Fans didn't just see a legend. They saw a companion who had walked with them through decades of change and who was still walking, even if his steps were slower. Mentorship also became central to his later life. Younger artists often sought his advice, and Bill welcomed them with patience. He told them that country music wasn't about chasing trends or filling arenas with noise. It was about truth, about emotion, about saying something that mattered. In those conversations, he often spoke of old friends, George Jones, Loretta Lynn, Patsy Cline, as if they were still alive, still standing beside him. In Bill's world, memory was never gone. It was simply another verse in the song of life. What made him remarkable wasn't just his longevity, but his philosophy. Even after heartbreak, accidents, criticism, and the silence of loneliness, he repeated 3 words like a mantra: grateful, thankful, blessed. It wasn't a slogan, it was a lifeline. Those words carried him through nights of doubt, through marriages that failed, through days when he wondered if anyone was still listening. And they are the words that define his legacy today. Bill Anderson's career is not simply a story of music, it is a story of endurance. A whisper that refused to be drowned out by the noise of time. A man who proved that gentleness could leave marks deeper than force. Yet one final question lingers. What does his journey teach us about what it means to be a legend? Bill Anderson's life is more than a catalog of hits. It is the portrait of a man who carried sorrow and turned it into melody, who endured heartbreak and transformed it into timeless words. His whisper once silenced theaters. Today, at 87, it silences generations, reminding them that country music's soul is not gone. 2 failed marriages, a devastating car accident, nights of loneliness. These were the shadows that shaped him. Yet through it all, he stood, wrote, sang, and endured. For 6 decades he has walked onto the Opry stage, not as a man untouched by pain, but as one who turned pain into truth. And that truth is what makes him unforgettable. Bill Anderson is not just a singer, not just a songwriter. He is the keeper of country music's flame, proof that even a whisper, when carried with honesty, can echo louder than a shout, and echo forever. For more emotional stories, check out this video.